Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
8:06, it's O'Connor and Company. Thanks for tuning in here on a busy Wednesday morning. Coming up in 30 minutes, we'll check in with May Mailman. She's the director of Independent Women's Law Center. We'll talk about the legal arguments about to be made in the Supreme Court, U.S. versus Skermeti, that has to do with Tennessee's right to ban gender mutilation surgeries and procedures on children. That's all coming up. Right now, though, it's Larry O'Connor here, Julie Gunlock there, and Julie, we've got Chuck Thies. Chuck Thies, who knows his way around D.C. politics like no one else. And Chuck, first of all, good morning. Happy Thanksgiving and holidays to you. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
Well, thank you. The House has already passed and authorized the use of the RFK Stadium complex area, which is federal land, to go back to the D.C. government's use so that they can make a deal with the Commanders for a new football stadium. The Senate's now wrangling with it, and the two senators from Maryland are trying to negotiate some deal. It's like, well, listen, we've got the team in our state right now, so if you want to build a stadium there, we need something back. And it turns out they want the D.C. Air National Guard squadron. What? How do you even do that? What kind of hubris do these guys have, Chuck?
Well, okay, let's talk about the hubris, but then let's talk about what's really going on.
Thank you.
Now it is unfortunate, I suppose, for Maryland that the Air Force a year ago decided that it was eliminating its detachment, as they call them in the military, its detachment of the Air National Guard. And they will be the only state without a National Guard Air Force unit. That's Maryland's problem, and that's their problem to solve. Yeah. But taking the district's Air National Guard unit is not the way to solve it. It just causes another problem. It eliminates the district's Air National Guard unit. Right. Now, let's talk for a second about what the district's Air National Guard unit does. First of all, it is 40% of D.C.'s National Guard deployment, 40%. Second of all, what does it do? When a stray or worse, rogue aircraft flies into D.C. airspace, it intercepts it 24/7. A lot of people think of the Air National Guard or the National Guard as deploying only when there's an emergency or civil unrest or with need. D.C.'s Air National Guard operates 24/7 to protect the skies from stray and rogue aircraft. Eliminating it would mean that the governor of Maryland could decide to rest that unit.
Yeah.
The governors determine how the National Guard is deployed, period. In fact, a president can't order a governor or their National Guard to do anything. And that's important to understand here, because when there is civil unrest in Washington, D.C., and we've seen it, the president can order the National Guard to protect the city and the people who live here and the elected officials who operate here. And that means that the D.C. National Guard would be without air support. The ground troops would be without air support in the event of civil unrest. And the president would have to call Maryland or Virginia and ask them to help us out in the event of a crisis. And either of those governors or both could say no.
Chuck, could this be sort of challenged constitutionally? Look, the District of Columbia is in the Constitution. The founders wanted there to be some independence. This is why statehood is so absurd, is because we wanted the district to have some level of independence from another executive, from a governor. So could this be constitutionally challenged, meaning it takes power away from the president in cases of civil unrest?
You should ask a legal scholar that. I am not 100% sure, but I just don't, I'm not a lawyer. I've played one on television, sure, but never on the radio. But I do want to say this. The D.C. National Guard, and later the Air National Guard, was founded in 1802 by then President Thomas Jefferson for the expressed purpose of defending D.C. when there was no other means to defend it. Why? Because it is unconstitutional. It is unlawful to deploy the Army, the
Right.
Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard on domestic land, unless you're protecting it from foreign attackers.
Right.
So again, in the event of civil unrest or in the event of a natural disaster,
And D.C.
DC's, yeah.
And D.C. has been under attack, War of 1812, first of all, but then during the Civil War, but also 9/11. It's not that long ago when an occurrence happened right here in Washington that demanded intervention from the D.C. Air National Guard. So is this going to take...
In the summer of 2020, D.C. was under attack. I live here. In the summer of 2020, D.C. was under attack. Hundreds of storefronts were smashed. Some things were burned. There were riots. I don't care if you want to call them protests. I live here. I saw them.
Oh,
there were riots in D.C.
So, Chuck, you can't talk about issues like this without having to mention Donald Trump's name. Something tells me that Donald Trump coming in as president in some way is sort of motivating this, or am I being too Trump myopic on this?
No, you're 100% right, and here's why. This issue about the Air Force, about the Air Force eliminating Maryland's Air National Guard didn't begin yesterday. This has been going on for a year. How come a year ago the two Democratic senators from Maryland didn't suggest taking D.C.'s Air National Guard wing? It has everything to do with Donald Trump. Think about this. If there is civil unrest in D.C. while Donald Trump is president, he will not have an Air National Guard wing to deploy. And that means any troops on the ground would be without air support unless another governor loans them to Donald Trump. And that, you talk to any military commander, no responsible military commander would deploy troops without air support. That doesn't mean that the choppers are in the air all the time. That doesn't mean that the jets are in the air all the time. It means it's available to them immediately in the event that those troops require air support.
Chuck Thies, last I checked...
It almost completely it completely hamstrings D.C.'s National Guard troops. The men and women on the ground are being put in jeopardy by this political deal.
Last I checked, Eleanor Holmes Norton and Muriel Bowser, Mr. Mendelson, they're obsessed with D.C. gaining statehood. So this is a great opportunity for them to flex their muscle and protect D.C.'s rights and sovereignty and say, screw you, Maryland. So I haven't heard anything from them. Where are they on it?
Eleanor Holmes Norton has come out against the deal. Mayor Bowser is silent. And D.C. Council Chairman Phil Mendelson has said that he objects to it. But they're not drawing any lines in the sand. It's lip service right now. And let's go back to the genesis of this. This is about a football stadium.
Yes, thank you.
This is about a football stadium. There are other ways to get the football stadium deal done.
That's right.
There are other ways to get it done. And what they're trying to do is rush this football stadium deal. This legislation that would be required to transfer the wing from Maryland to D.C., they're planning on attaching it to a large defense spending bill that has to pass by the end of the year. They're just going to tuck it in there. Yeah, so there'll be no debates other than a story in the Washington Post in this program. There'll be no debates. It'll be a backroom deal. And then the next Congress and the next president will be very hamstrung from doing anything about it. It's flat out wrong. It's extremely dangerous, and it's about a football stadium.
Thank you.
I say, and I support bringing the Commanders back to D.C. I support it, and I support building a stadium on that land where RFK Stadium is. But there are other ways to accomplish this deal. This is an unethical and dangerous way to go about doing it, and it's an absolute, not just poke of the finger in Donald Trump's eye, but it's a way of hamstringing him as president in an unsafe manner and in an unprecedented manner since 1802, when the National Guard was created to defend D.C.
Well, listen, you're right. There's been barely a mention of this. Washington Post had one article that sort of both sides did. We obviously think it's an outrage. There are a lot of senators and their staffers who hear us every morning. Let's see if they were listening. Chuck Thies, thank you, sir.